In this module, we will learn the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs of the Estimate Activity Resources process. Estimate Activity Resources is the process involving making decisions on the types and quantities of human resources, equipment, and materials needed for project activities. This process determines resource types or labor categories for each schedule activity. Individual resources will be assigned in the Acquire Resources process. Due to their strong overlap, this process must also be closely coordinated with the Acquire Resources, Estimate Activity Durations, and Estimate Costs processes. The PMBOK guide defines several key inputs to the Estimate Activity Resources process. The Resource Management Plan defines when and how resource requirements will be met. The activity list and activity attributes provide the level of detail required to estimate resource requirements for the schedule activities of the project. Resource calendars document the working days and non-working days for project resources. This information will be determined as a result of the Acquire Resources and Conduct Procurements processes. This is an example of how estimating activity resources may be performed before the team is hired and progressively elaborated after the team is hired. The risk register may contain risks regarding scarce or limited resources that could affect the resource requirements for tasks. Finally, the cost estimates could affect the way that resource types are assigned to activities. For example, while a senior resource may be ideal to complete the task, the cost estimate may only allow for a more junior resource to be allocated. Enterprise environmental factors can also be an input, including stakeholder culture and the organization's existing infrastructure and tools. Finally, organizational process assets may contribute lessons learned or provide organizational policies and guidelines for how resource requirements will be determined. There are several tools and techniques for the Estimate Activity Resources process. Alternatives analysis is a technique to evaluate the resource options that are available to perform project work. For example, an activity like digging a hole could be performed with 3 people and 3 shovels, or with just 1 person and a sophisticated drill or bore. Published estimating data can provide valuable insight to labor rates and costs for various geographical locations. This might be found within organizational process assets or be researched from industry standards. Bottom-up estimating is a technique to break down each schedule activity into more detail for the purposes of estimating, then rolling the components back up to the activity level. This is similar to decomposition. However, the added detail is only used on a temporary basis for estimation. Analogous estimating is the use of actual data from a similar project as a basis for predicting resource needs for future activities estimates. Parametric estimating is the use of a mathematical equation to estimate the resource needs of an activity based on a known quantity and rate. The Project Management Information System is a tool to assist in resource estimation. This may be computer software. There are 3 key outputs of the Estimate Activity Resources process. Resource requirements is the documentation of the resource types and quantities that will be required for each work package or schedule activity. These will be an input to other planning processes, such as estimating activity durations. A resource breakdown structure is a hierarchical structure that sorts the resources by category or type. And a basis of estimates is documentation stating how the estimates were generated, assumptions, constraints, and anticipated variances. Estimate Activity Resources is the process involving making decisions on the types and quantities of human resources, equipment, and materials needed for project activities. This process determines resource types, or labor categories, for each schedule activity. Individual resources will be assigned in the acquire resources process. Due to their strong overlap, this process must also be closely coordinated with the acquire resources, estimate activity durations, and estimate costs processes.